innumerable decisions that have to be made. When we boil it all down, there are essentially 3 decisions that are vital. And those decisions are these. We have to find a place to hold the wedding. We have to invite the people we want to be there. And finally, we have to figure out what price we're willing to pay for these festivities. And when you're planning such an event, and it's usually a large event, whether that's 100 people or 1,000 people, there are a multitude of opinions of how to do it. Everybody's got the right way, right? Everybody has the perfect place. Everybody knows what the guest list should be before the bride and groom do. And when you're planning this wedding, or when they're planning this wedding, price is no object, right? It kind of reminds me of being amongst Baptists. Amongst Baptists, if there's 5 Baptists in the room, there's 6 opinions there, right? The same is true when people are planning a wedding. You got mother putting in her input. You got mother-in-law wanting her opinion to be known. And in the midst of all of those things, we find a lack of direction because there are so many opinions on what we ought to do. And because there are so many opinions and because there is no direction, oftentimes the bride can lack confidence. She doesn't know which way to turn because she wants to please everybody. And thus her confidence is shaken. However, her confidence is restored, not by some plan that she comes up with, but it's restored when she turns to that partner that she can trust, that man that asked her to be his bride. And I mention that because the same is true for us spiritually. The same is true for us in our walk with Christ. We have quoted the Lord Jesus Christ, but Jesus isn't interested in dating. Jesus is interested in spending eternity with us. And as we walk through this Christian life, there are a multitude of ways that people say it ought to be done. And thus, there are many Christians today that have absolutely no confidence as they attempt to walk with their bridegroom. But in John chapter 14, Jesus commands his distressed bride. He doesn't command her, he comforts her. He comforts these distressed disciples by calling them to find their confidence in him. Jesus restores his bride's confidence, his church's confidence, by planning their wedding himself. And he does so by doing 3 things. Number 1, he prepares a place for her. Number 2, he invites people to the wedding. And number 3, he paid the ultimate price. And those are the 3 things I want to talk to you about this morning. First, let's look at this place that is prepared for the bride. Chapter 14, verse 1 through 4 says this: "Don't let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me." Stop right there. Let me give you the background to this statement. We are still looking at Jesus speaking to his bride at the Last Supper. And what has just happened? Jesus got on his hands and knees, proposed to his bride by washing his disciples' feet. And then Jesus drops a bombshell on him. He says, "I know you're excited that we're going to spend eternity together, but let me tell you something. I'm going to go away. I'm going to die." And his bride is shaken. They're shocked. They're distressed because the one that they love the most just told them that he is going to go away. Can you imagine being in that situation? Can you imagine as a young man or as a young woman, you go to the moment where a proposal is made and you are so excited. You can't wait to tell everybody that you know. And then you get the phone call that your future husband has been in an automobile accident and he's not coming home. Or you get the telephone call and you find that your future bride, she has cancer and doesn't have long to live. Can you imagine that gut-wrenching experience? That is exactly what the disciples faced in this moment. And Jesus says, don't let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, but believe also in me. He's saying the cure to the distressed heart is faith. Trust in me. Do you remember when I brought my daughter up here? And I said, turn your back towards me, close your eyes, and fall. She had to have confidence that her father was going to be there. And that's exactly what Jesus is calling his bride to do. Will you trust me that I will be there? Though I say I'm going away, will you trust that I will be there for you in the end? Will you put your faith in me? But he goes on and he says, in my Father's house, there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. But I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come back. And I will take you to be with me, that you may be where I am also. You know the way to the place that I am going. Jesus comforts this despairing bride, this hurting church, by promising to prepare a place of reunion. You see, Jesus, like any good husband, looks beyond the wedding party, the day of the party, and looks forward to the future, because he knows, as a good husband knows, he must prepare a place for his bride to dwell. So Jesus goes to prepare a place at the Father's house. This is to have an eternal perspective. And when we read this passage, what we see here is a beautiful picture of the Jewish wedding ceremony. And it's a little different than how we have our wedding, right? The Jewish wedding ceremony goes like this. A young man identifies a beautiful girl, and he wants to make her his bride. So what he does first is he goes to his father, and he and his father go to her father, and they negotiate. They negotiate a price for that bride. And when that price is negotiated, that son pours a cup of wine, takes it to the bride, the potential bride, and offers for her to become his wife. And up to that moment, she has a choice. And that choice is to say yes or no. But if she takes the cup and drinks, that signifies that she says yes. And that begins a process. And that process goes like this. That son leaves with his father and returns to his father's house. And he builds a place to house his bride. But not only a place to house his bride and to live with her for the rest of their lives, but a place to hold their wedding. And from that point on, while that son is preparing a place for his bride, the bride has the obligation to make herself ready, because she doesn't know the day or the hour that her bridegroom will return. And one day, with shouts, with trumpet blasts, with the cheerful joyfulness of friends that accompanied him, the bridegroom returns. And he takes his bride back to his father's house, and they celebrate the wedding. Jesus is saying, I'm not just building a place for you here on this earth, but I'm building a place to spend eternity with you. And if I go to prepare that place for you, you can be assured of this, that I will come again. Why? So that you can be with me, because you're my bride. I would ask you this morning, do you have that sense of certainty that Jesus is going to come for you? That he hasn't forgotten where you're at? That he has prepared a place for you individually in glory. Why? Because you're his bride. He wants to spend eternity with you. Psalm chapter 127 verse 1 says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, its laborers who build in vain." In your walk with Christ, is He involved in building that house? Is He the one who you trust in? Or are you trusting in yourself? Because if you're trusting in yourself, you labor in vain. But he goes on. And John makes this beautiful point. He said, guys, it's not about the mansions in glory. That's why I didn't read that translation. I mean, I love the King James translation. In my Father's house there are many mansions. It's a beautiful imagery, and maybe that's true. And I didn't read any imagery about the gold streets in heaven or the pearly gates, because I think when we focus on those things, we miss the point. Heaven's not about the stuff that's there. It's not about the building that Jesus has made for us. It's about Him being there and us being with Him. This morning, do you have the certainty that you will be with Him? Do you understand that He is coming again? And He's coming for His bride. Saints, Christians can have confidence. They can find their confidence in difficult circumstances because they have certainty that Jesus is coming again. 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 20 says this. It says, we have in Jesus a more sure word of prophecy. What he means is, not only do we have the prophets speaking to us, but we have seen prophecy become fact in Jesus Christ's life. Do you know, in Jesus' first coming, there are 300 prophecies that lay out His entire life, from birth to death and even through the resurrection and ascension. 300. For His second coming, in the times in which we live, there are 8 times as many. Do you have certainty that Christ is returning? And I ask you that multiple times because as I travel, as I preach, when I talk about the return of Christ, it is not lost people that get concerned. It's Christians who get concerned. Why is that? Jesus' return is our blessed hope. Jesus says in the Scriptures, when you see the world going to pot, look up, because your redemption draws nigh. But as I speak to Christians and I say, do you understand that Christ could return at any moment? He could return in our day. I see this fear in their eyes. And I wondered often, why is that? This is our hope. This is what our faith is about, being united with our bridegroom. And the only answer I could come up with is this, that there are many Christians that have invested more in their church membership than in their relationship with the bridegroom. I would ask you this morning, do you know Jesus Christ? But John goes on from the place, but also he talks about the people that are invited to this wedding. In verse 5 through 7, he says, Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really knew me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know Him and have seen Him. The next stage in the preparation for a wedding, the planning of a wedding, is to determine the people that you want to invite. And the fact that you have to determine the people that you want to invite makes a wedding an exclusive event. One of the things that you don't want in a wedding are wedding crashers. People who are uninvited, who are just showing up for the party. So you make a list. You look for those people who are significant to your life, who have poured into you, who you have developed relationships with, and you invite them. Well, I would submit to you this morning, in the same manner, Thomas is told that eternal life